We think of Vikings as raiders and warriors. What rarely gets spoken of is what followed once the fighting was over. When the clash of axes stopped and the shield walls shattered, that's when the true nightmare began. Not for the men left lifeless on the ground. Their pain had ended. It was their wives, their daughters, every woman who survived the raid who faced something far worse. What the Vikings inflicted on them made death seem merciful. You believe, you understand Viking cruelty. The sagas barely dare to hint at what came next. If you are interested in documented history from the Viking and Norse period, make sure to subscribe. It helps us continue this work. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from. All of this is grounded in sources from Ibn Fedlin's eyewitness writings to archaeological finds at Dublin's slave markets. Now back to the story. The monastery at Clonmacnoise fell to Thorgils and his fleet. 43 monks were cut down defending the altar. The chronicler describes the slaughter, then falls silent about what befell the women, but the evidence survives. The chains, excavations at Dublin's Wood Quay, uncovered the remains of a slave market, iron shackles fitted for women's wrists, ankle rings small enough for children, and storage buildings meant for human cargo. Dublin's Norsemen did not just plunder gold and silver, they plundered bodies. A captured wife became a commodity, not a person. In the markets, the going price was coldly calculated: 20 silver for a young woman, 15 for a mother, 10 for one injured during capture. These figures are carved into runic inscriptions in Schleswig, receipts in stone. Yet being sold was sometimes the best possible fate. In 862, the Vikings stormed the settlement of Port Marrow. The Irish annals record 47 warriors killed, but nothing about the 53 women seized in the longhouses. Soil tests from nearby bogs fill in the silence: 23 female bodies, all showing deliberate violence. None of these deaths were chaotic. The wounds followed patterns: skulls fractured from behind, forearms shattered from defense, ribs broken by prolonged assault. These were not battle casualties, these were executions carried out days after the raid, after decisions had been made. The pattern repeats. In 871, the great heathen army captured Reading. Chroniclers note King Ethelred's defeat, but omit the royal women's fate. Excavations at the old Saxon palace reveal stones stained with iron oxide, blood residue, enough for dozens of deaths. Norse warrior culture had strict laws. A slain man's wife legally became the property of his killer, not as a servant but as a forced wife. The old word was kona, meaning owned woman, living property. The Gragas law codes spelled out the ritual: the captor had to claim her before witnesses within 3 days or rivals could contest it. Women were fought over like livestock, and forced marriage was not the worst fate. When Norse raiders destroyed monasteries like Bangor, the chronicles recorded fire and ruin but stayed silent on what came next. Archaeology reveals the rest. Burn layers at similar sites hold women's bones arranged in ritual patterns. Ibn Fadlan described the ritual rape and killing of a slave girl at a chieftain's funeral, and Scandinavian boat burials confirm this was common. Female skeletons bear strangulation marks, drug traces, and signs of restraint, subdued with henbane, dazed and hallucinating before death. The Great Army's winter camps tell an equally grim story. At Repton, archaeologists found 249 skeletons, but only 63 were women, proof that women were captured and taken elsewhere. Isotope analysis shows they were not locals but captives from Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Those buried had mostly died from childbirth or disease, the rest vanished into the slave networks. Viking Dublin was not just a port, it was a hub for human trafficking. Tree-ring studies show continuous waterfront expansion from 841 to 970, driven not by fishing but by the slave trade. Stone warehouses could hold 200 captives, with carved drainage channels for human waste. Arabic chroniclers wrote of Viking slave caravans reaching Baghdad, where pale-skinned women were luxury goods. Captivity, however, was not the worst fate. When Irish forces retook Dublin in 914, they found punishment pits outside the walls. Excavations uncovered skeletons with broken legs and shattered arms, injuries designed to prevent escape or suicide. The pits were too small to lie flat, too shallow to stand. The women were left crouched, alive, to die slowly over days. Viking law codes confirm this punishment. Any slave woman who harmed her master was to be buried alive, not fully but just enough to ensure a prolonged death. Soil analysis supports this, showing decomposition layers consistent with slow, torturous deaths. It was prolonged agony, meant as a lesson. Captives were forced to watch, learning what defiance cost. By 919, King Harald Fairhair had consolidated Norway, ending civil wars. Viking expansion slowed, but the slave economy did not. It became systemized, trade routes allowed regular deliveries, and merchants promised human cargo on schedule. Byzantine records and the Rus' Byzantine Treaty of 944 list slave prices by category. Young women fetched the highest prices, pregnant women sold at a discount, children were nearly worthless. Even after major defeats, the system persisted. When 5 Irish kingdoms united to defeat the Norse at the Battle of Brunanburh, they found portable breeding pens in the baggage train. These were not crude cages but engineered frames with iron fittings, chains sized for children, and modular sections to form mobile compounds. Where marks showed constant use. War, for the Vikings, was not only conquest, it was human harvesting. Wives and daughters of defeated warriors were the main target. Every settlement had pens, every harbor had processing sites, turning slavery into part of daily life. When Eric Bloodaxe fell in 954, the last Viking kingdom in England collapsed, but the networks did not disappear. Christian rulers absorbed them, renaming slaves as indentured servants. Monastic records show a surge of forced servitude after Viking defeats, the same captives under a new name. Archaeology tells the darker story. Mass graves of women appear exactly in the years of Viking losses. They were not killed in raids but executed systematically. At Repton, a grave sealed in 986 held 236 female bodies, all showing signs of blunt force trauma, strangulation, or poisoning. Isotope testing revealed they were Norse-born, not foreign captives. These were the Vikings' own wives and daughters, killed by their men before enemy capture. Soil studies show the killings took place over several days, not a frenzied massacre but an organized extermination. On one skull, a runic message was carved after death: "I am better this way." The skull belonged to a girl of 12 to 14, born in Norway and killed in England. This was the grim mirror of centuries of Viking practice. Their sexual violence was not random, it was codified. Icelandic Grágis law codes required a man to claim a woman before witnesses. Her consent was irrelevant. If she committed suicide, her family owed 40 silver marks, more than most men earned in a year. By 978, King Athelred taxed Viking slave trading rather than banning it. Shipwrecks reveal holds built for human cargo, with ventilation and reinforced compartments. These were not improvised slave ships, they were purpose-built. The largest Viking slave ship found so far could carry 80 captives below deck. Timber dating places its construction around 912, and burn marks show it sank at sea with all 80 chained women on board. Yet some refused to remain victims. In 923, Frankish records name Gunhild, a freed Norse captive who turned Viking methods back on them. For 7 years she led warbands through Frankish territory, burning outposts, freeing captives, and destroying 12 Viking camps. Her last raid targeted the slave market at Rouen, where contemporary accounts describe the systematic execution of every trader, 47 Viking men castrated and left to bleed to death. After 930 she vanishes from the record, but burn layers from this period suggest someone was hunting Vikings. The practice of seizing women did not end with the Vikings. Norman chronicles describe William's knights listing women as chattel in land grants. The Domesday Book records them alongside cattle and plows. Archaeology confirms this system. Castles had windowless cells built specifically for female captives. Infant remains with near total mortality show that children of forced unions were deliberately killed to prevent inheritance claims. The Norman conquest in 1066 intensified the practice. Saxon women were systematically captured and married to Norman knights. Marriage turned rape into legality, and chroniclers praised it as civilizing the bloodline, in modern terms, ethnic cleansing. Medieval marriage contracts reveal the economics. Saxon heiresses were prized not for love but for their land. Women's consent meant nothing. Convent populations tripled after Hastings, and suicide among noblewomen soared. The church canonized some as martyrs, the state recorded them as property losses. Science now fills the silence. Genetic studies show Celtic and Saxon female lines entering Scandinavian DNA in the 9th century, evidence of systematic capture and forced reproduction. In Iceland, 60% of female ancestry traces back to Celtic captives. In Norway, 40% to British Isles women. Archaeology uncovers still darker truths. At Jorvik, modern York, excavations revealed a building with 64 cells and chains, occupied for 40 years, a breeding facility in the city center. Hundreds of women were cycled through, forced into repeated pregnancies, then discarded. Church records list 732 baptisms there, with nearly all children sold into servitude. The church paid regular fees to the operators, funding cathedrals with the profits. At Repton, soil cores reveal that the infamous mass grave of Norse women was filled over half a century. This was not one massacre but a recurring policy. Bone tests show mercury poisoning, a slow descent into madness before execution. On one skull, carved words remain, "Better this way."